My son's name is Tommy. And we came up with that name because we had that on a short list of names that we thought were presentable. Thomas was a great name, but we always like to use like shorter, cuter names as kids. And so Tommy was what we were thinking that we would call him. We didn't know if we really wanted to have a boy named Tommy later in life where he would be in the professional world and referenced as Tommy. And so like we were kind of just juggling back and forth whether that was really something that we wanted to solidify and put on his birth certificate. But when we found out that he was going to be stillborn, it just completely made sense, and like that was 100% his name because he would always be our little boy. And he would always be known as Tommy, just this little boy. So
welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Lee Red, and on this episode, Ben is telling the story of his son, Tommy, who was born still. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partner's, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us.
but the story of Tommy goes back before just even that day that we found out that he didn't have a heartbeat. Went back to about a week before, and this was on Christmas Eve. Brooke had a pain in her top of her thigh, and we'd gone and seen the doctor a few times, and it was always just considered a pinched nerve. She sometimes has a lot of like sickness and pains during birth, I'm sure, like most women, but this one seemed a little bit more intense, and the doctor had prescribed some pain medication and was giving her some positions, and we'd asked my brother, who's a physical therapist, like how to get rid of a pinched nerve or like relieve some of that pain. And Christmas Eve, while we had just sat down after putting out gifts and kind of going through the Christmas Eve routine with our kids, she had bent down and felt an immediate pop of pain and was just in agony. She laid on the couch and was just like grabbing at it and, acting as though this was like really intense pain. And, my first instinct was, oh, it's like a Charlie horse. Like I've had those, like my foot feels like it's going to explode. I'm sure that it's like your leg. Let's, maybe like go, take a bath. Maybe you can get some pain medication. And so I helped her upstairs, and I was, I guess, checking on the kids, and Brooke called in, and she was just frantic and didn't know what to do. And I walked into the bathroom and immediately just had the most scared feeling I've had for a long time. And I saw her leg that was dark red on one side and like normal colored on the other. And I just immediately knew something was really wrong. And it just hit me that if I don't get her to the hospital, like I could be losing my wife and my child. And so, we hopped in the car. We were speeding over. This was probably, I'm guessing 9 or 10 at night. And she's just wailing in pain. And like, not that she was blacking out, but I feel like you could tell that she was just not herself just because of the pain. And like, I was going very, very fast because I just needed to get there. And like, all I could think of in my head was, if I don't get there within the next few minutes, like this is going to be over. And so like we rush into the emergency room, and everyone there is just so casual. And I just remember inside of me just this anger of like, help me, help us. Like, this is something really serious. And I remember there was a guy that had come in. He'd wandered from a few blocks away, I'm guessing, and he said he had like a cough or something, and he was in front of us, and it was this, like, can I get somebody to just look after my cough? And I just remember thinking, I'm gonna like tackle this guy and push him out of the way because my wife is like either going into labor or there's something really wrong with her leg. And so as soon as we showed the person checking in and had told them that she was pregnant, like they immediately sent us over to the labor and delivery, and they checked us in. They knew she was in pain, and as soon as they saw her leg, they called or did the alert over the entire system, and within a few minutes there were 20 or 30 people in the room. And that hit me again. I thought, we're at the hospital and I'm still not safe. Like, they're throwing all these people at us because she is going to die. And so I am just trying to deal with all these emotions and trying to figure it out. Like, I'm on the phone with her mom and dad, and they're kind of trying to keep me calm. And, but they did, such a good job, like, providing comfort, and, they got there really soon, and were able to kind of take care of both of us and just make us feel like things were going to be okay. And so, they had given her some morphine and a few other things and had calmed down her breathing, because they had thought, well, they had known, I guess, immediately that it was a blood clot, and that her leg wasn't getting the blood, and it wasn't kind of moving like it should have. And when they had called that alert, they thought that she was having a pulmonary embolism, like some part of it had broken off and was going to go into her lungs. And so that was like their main concern. But once they had cooled her down and had figured out that like her shortness of breath and other things was just more related to the pain, like, it started making us feel a lot better. But that only turned to, now what about the baby? Like, is Tommy going to be okay? And what was kind of frustrating is I felt like we received so many mixed opinions and plans of actions. I feel like they came up with 4 or 5 plans of actions of, okay, we're going to deliver your baby and then we're going to deal with the blood clot. No, we're going to deal with the blood clot and then deliver your baby. And it kind of went back and forth depending on what doctor was on call or that we could get a hold of. So it was just like that confusing, really hard moment where you're making these decisions and trying to rely on the expertise of doctors and nurses and people that have been doing this their whole lives. So they decided to give her I guess they decided to give her a filter, which was inserted down through one of the arteries and then placed below her heart. So if any of the pieces of the clot had broken off, that would be stopped by that filter. And I distinctly remember, and something that I will never forget, like sitting outside of the operating room thinking, like, this could be the moment. Like, this is, and I know that throughout like the hours leading up to that, where it had been a traumatic experience, like there were like a lot of like, oh, is she going to die or is she not? But I felt like at this point, it's like they're either going to be able to place that filter and help the situation and actually keep this from happening and her from passing away, or like this is going to be where they go in and like find out that like there are going to be some complications or issues. But I remember seeing her face coming out of the operating room and just feeling a lot better about it, and just having that as like an exhaling period of time. We stayed in the ICU that night, and they were planning to potentially go ahead and put her into labor delivery, but they weren't kind of sure if they wanted to do it there or if they wanted to do it at IMC. And we had made the decision based on it being close to our families, based on IMC being a reputable hospital that had a lot of professionals, kind of like the center of the whole system. So they life flighted her via ambulance up there the next morning. And I just felt like that was like the best decision. Not to say that doctors within our area weren't capable, but I felt as though like we were putting our chances in the best hands of professionals up at the other hospital.
Now, the IMC hospital is the
Intermountain Medical Center.
Yeah, and that's the big hospital that the IHC Health Group has built.
Correct.
So you thinking that would be the medical hub, I think would be a very logical way to put it. It would be the medical hub of the IHC system. So
yeah, and I've gone there many times, and people have referenced my mom has some blood or some heart issues, and so she always goes to IMC based on that expertise. And so that seemed like the real logical choice. They gave us two choices: go down to like the Utah County Southern one or the IMC, and I felt like, okay, IMC is one that probably I would trust more than anything else.
Special built for to be the hub of the health group. So
the only problem was that we were dealing with one of the OBs from Utah County, and she was feeling good about us delivering Tommy. His lungs, based on it being 36 weeks, had developed enough, and she felt as though he had a good chance of not having to stay in the ICU very long based on that. And, they'd done a couple stress tests and thought, okay, he's ready. Like, we can take him now. Obviously there are health concerns with Brooke having that blood clot, and, the pressure and traumatic events of having delivery, like, that could potentially happen. And so she was kind of weighing it back and forth and thought, like, the clot had been stabilized. Tommy looked good to be delivered, so like we could do this. But when we got back up to the other hospital, when we were at IMC, the doctor up there, the OB, the main one, decided that he wanted to deliver in a few weeks. He thought, Tommy looks good, the clot is stable, there's no reason for us to deliver at this point. We involved our own OBGYN because we wanted to make sure that he was in the know of what was going on. He's such a great OB that, like, he was taking our cell phone calls and just like really keeping tabs on us. And so we thought it was the right thing and what was going to work best for us. And so she stayed a day there, and we were released the 26th, because we spent all day of Christmas inside of hospitals. My brother had taken our kids and given them Christmas. And tried to provide some normalcy. So it was
it's going to be a great blessing to have that done for you.
It was hard to watch the videos though. We were able to do gifts the next day, which was a lot of fun. And so all was well. I mean, Christmas was still a success in our minds, because we still had a baby, and we still had our other kids, and Brooke was still living. So we didn't think much of it. We went into our OB a few days later, and we did a stress test, and he had a healthy heart. I remember him saying like the heart beats like a little low, but like nothing to be concerned about. But they had said the same thing at the hospital, so there was no reason for us to think that anything was wrong. Um, Fast forward couple days to New Year's Day, we had decided not to spend it with my family, which is something we do every year. We do a trip up to Bear Lake and just spend 3 or 4 days all together. And based on Brooke's health and the health of the baby, we decided to stay home and do something that most people do on New Year's or Christmas. We went and saw a movie. It was Wreck-It Ralph, the the new one, Breaks the Internet.
Breaks the internet.
And I remember just getting out to the car and Brooke saying, I don't think I've felt the baby kick. And I said, well, let's go home and or get you some sugar. So she went home, did orange juice, laid down to get the kick count. And she called me in a little bit later and she's like, I still haven't felt him. I think we should go in. And I was like, all right, let's go in. Again, I wasn't thinking that anything was wrong because Winnie, our other child, she didn't kick or move a lot sometimes. And we had gone in the night before she was delivered and Brooke was just convinced that she wasn't kicking or moving. And they said, no, she's totally fine. I think she's just large enough that she can't move a lot within that space. And so driving, Brooke looked at me and said, what do you think about this? Like, do you think this is a concern? And I said, I am thinking that it should be fine because Winnie did the same thing. We just had our stress test and his heart was fine. And so I am inclined to think that everything will be fine. And so we got to the hospital and we had our 2 kids. And I remember sitting in that room, same room we had checked Winnie and a lot of our others because they'd both been born at the Riverton Hospital. So it was a familiar place and even some familiar faces, in my opinion, from our time with other nurses. And they hooked up everything and they were kind of going through. And I remember just that look on the nurse's face is, you could tell she didn't want to alarm us. And she was kind of frantically trying to find the heartbeat. And at several times throughout that, I swore I heard a heartbeat. And she would move it, and I would even say, no, I think it's there, or something. And what I was not realizing that it was actually Brooke's heartbeat that was racing and at the levels of what you'd see in a newborn. And that was just like this. I can't even explain. Like there was just like this sick feeling and this like I got punched in the face or the gut. Like I feel like I had not prepared myself at all that would be what we were going to deal with. And I just remember like the kids, like even looking at me and looking at Brooke, because we had met eyes and we were already starting to tear up and just get this really worried look on our face. And the kids were starting to like tear at our clothes and saying, what's going on? What's going on? And I just didn't know what to say. So the nurse, rushed him out and like I just was asking her, like, are you sure? Like, can you check again? She's like, no, I'm sure. Like, I'm sorry. And she just walked out. And I know they had to do like an official one. So like when they came back and they were doing the official and there's a second nurse there, I just remember thinking, no, like he's going to, like, you're going to find it. Like you just couldn't find it that time. This time you will. And it never did, obviously. So after that, we had talked to her sister. Sorry, I get really emotional too because we had a lot of help. It's just really humbling how many people stepped up and at a drop of a hat. I don't think I've told the story since then. And so a lot of that emotion is rushing back in. But she was able to take our kids for another couple days until we were able to, have him and spend some time. And she had another brother come down from Bountiful, and he had grabbed her clothes and was just right there ready to help. And there's something you can't say thank you enough, or you can't like really compensate that, because it was just like a time of need thing. So anyway, so they gave us the option to deliver the next morning. They wanted to give her a little bit of time because she had blood thinners in her system, and they had to wait until I think it was 24 hours. So they gave us a room to just hang out. Brooke had been hooked up to a few things just to like monitor and make sure she was healthy too. And I just remember laying on the bed with Brooke and both of us silent for so long, and just every once in a while tearing up and saying, I just can't believe this is happening to us. Like, he was healthy. They said he was okay. They said that, he would be born in a few weeks and everything would be great. And then, silence again for several minutes or hours, or I have no idea. Like, we didn't sleep very well. I think they maybe gave her some sleeping pills because they wanted to make sure that she was prepared to have the child and everything the next morning. The next morning, she was hooked up like she was going to have a normal birth, which I think is such a mean trick, I guess, that that he was going to be born still, and you still had to go through all of the labor items. Like, you had to be hooked up, you had to hear all the sounds, you had to have nurses in and out. They were checking her progress consistently, and it just felt like a mean trick. I feel like in the past it's been that fun anticipation for me as the father. I feel like I'm the one kind of looking on the outside. When we had Connor and Winnie, like, I would run and get drinks or food, or provide some comic relief sometimes, just because like you're in that room for several hours. But I felt like even though we were in that same place like that, it just felt like this, you just knew this like impending, not doom, but in this moment was going to come when no longer was he like a baby inside of Brooke, but he was going to be still. He was not going to be going home with us. And so the hours leading up to it, like, you were trying to deal with it. And at the same time, they have people coming in, and, there are well-meaning people that are trying to, give gifts or like, tell you, where to support groups. And the last thing you want to think about at that point is the realities of the situation. Like, it's just this moment where you want to hide away and not have to deal with that question. You want to like forget that like this is actually happening to you. And I remember distinctly getting the packet that had all of the listings for the mortuaries and thinking, I can't do that. I have no idea what I am doing. I've never looked at a price, a plot, or thought of anything like this. I have no idea how I'm going to actually do this. And again, in the moment of need, her father had volunteered to make those calls and do that for us. And again, something I don't think I can ever repay, because I don't think I could have got through a phone call with any of those people. Like trying to talk about those details and thinking of it in such a worldly manner when, you're going to be just meeting your child and having his spirit really not in him really at that time. And so, like, to deal with that worldly and those details, just, I couldn't do it. So thankfully they were able to step up and do that. And I don't even know what the cost was or whatever. Like, I was just like, sure, I do it. Like, we'll deal with it later. Another thing going through my mind through the whole birth was what he would look like. It just was running through my mind. Okay, we haven't heard his or felt him kick for about 24 hours. What happens when you don't have oxygen and you don't, or a heartbeat or whatnot? And so my first thought was, he's not going to even look natural. And I felt bad for thinking that, but at the same time I thought, like, I want to see him and I want to feel a connection with him. And I was afraid that I wouldn't. Was afraid that he would come out and just be dark blue and just give me such a shock that, like, I wouldn't have that initial connection. And it was amazing. He came out and he looked perfect. He had color in his skin, and he had 10 fingers and 10 toes, and it just felt like there was no reason. Just felt like, buddy, what's going on? Like, you were so close. I just remember even looking at him and thinking, what if you just started crying right now? But I remember just thinking, as I held him, just feeling that warmth. I had looked down at him, and I know it was my chest rising and falling as I was breathing, but there's a part of me that thought he was. As for family, her parents were there from the very beginning. My parents had talked about coming up from St. George, but we're trying to think through logistics, and they surprised us, and we were able to make it. By the time he was born later afternoon. One of the lucky things that we've talked about and has been super noticeable for us, during that time there weren't any other births within the unit, and so to not have the hustle and bustle and the sounds of other successful births, I guess, that they sometimes play the music when, like, a baby's born. I felt like it was like a tender mercy that there weren't other babies born, and we were able to kind of grieve silently, and we had the attention of all the staff and other people at the hospital. So that was definitely a huge blessing, and something that I think we talk about and will forever be grateful for. They were able to even give like a one of the rooms for all the family members that had come in, and they had delivered food and stuff like that. So it's something that like Riverton Hospital will always be a preferred place for us based on how they were able to treat us in that moment. But right after he was born, Brooke and I were able to spend some time with him, just us. And I have seen movies of sadness and people wailing because they are so sad, but I've never really experienced it in my life. I just remember hearing those and seeing Brooke in that moment and just wishing that we could have had even a breath or some type of time with him other than having him born still. After that, we brought the kids in. We wanted to make sure that they saw him with his color, and kids being kids, they lighten the mood a little bit. They wanted to hold him and touch him, and I think we were pretty good about letting him do that, but like explaining that he wouldn't be coming home, and they kept asking, when's he coming home? When's he coming home? And just remember explaining it a few times, but just not knowing how to after that, just thinking, you're right. Like, why? Why can't he come home with us? Kind of thing, And I just thought that innocence of the kids is kind of that profound. It's like, yeah, like I should be questioning why this is too, But it was a really good experience to have them in there, and I feel like they talk about that, and like it's something that probably will stick out in their minds even though they're so young. I feel like they have actually been really good through this whole thing. I feel like there's some understanding. I mean, I think they look at us and the emotions and kind of play off our emotions sometimes, but at the same time, I feel like they feel the loss and they talk about it because they really did expect and wanted their little baby brother with them. Looking back, like Brooke has mentioned a few times that she wishes that not as many people had come into the room, because really after we had a moment, our kids had a moment, our parents were able to come in and spend some time. Like it kind of became like an open door. But for her, I can totally see that. She had just given birth. She's in this vulnerable spot based on like her body, like everything else emotion wise happening. But from my perspective, I wanted all the people there. It was a strength. It was support. It was energy to help me get through the day and get through that time. I'm usually a pretty closed person. I deal with a lot of things internally, and so for me to welcome people and all the support and people wanting to come in and talk to us, like I was completely blown away because it's not who I usually am. But at that point, I loved it and I wanted people there. And I thought that as people went away, like it kind of took away from like my support or like my ability to like deal with things. So the hospital said, yeah, you have 24 hours, and how you spend that with him. Like they offered to put a cooling thing in there, and we had decided not to. We wanted to hold him, and we wanted to. We gave us. I'm trying to think on how many hours that we gave us, because we had delivered later afternoon, and people had been kind of in and out, and we were all just like struggling with how tired, because it had been like a 2 full days of that going on, and so we were trying to decide what the best time would be to hand Tommy over. And so we had set a time. I think it was like 2 a.m. if I'm remembering correctly, but Brooke would probably know the time better than I would. But I remember spending several more hours where we were able to just hold him and talk to him and just enjoy his presence there. One of the things that I really liked with the hospital as well is when we were ready to pass Tommy over, a nurse came in and she took him as if she was taking him to the nursery. It made us feel a little bit better about it than just handing it over to some mortuary employee that wouldn't handle him the same as you were. You were a nurse that had been there during the delivery, so that's something that really meant something to us. So after the birth and our hospital stay, we made our way home, and in the meantime, people cleaned our house, delivered I don't even know how many gifts and blankets and flowers and other things. And I welcomed it with open arms again. I usually don't. I hate asking for help. I usually hate talking about my feelings and going in that direction. But at that moment in time, I was just welcoming everything and just giving hugs. I'm not a hugger either, but everybody that came was just that life support for me and gave me the energy to keep going. And I remember in that moment thinking, Brooke, like, all these people are coming and talking to us. Look at your phone. Like, there's so many text messages of people trying to talk to you, because they would try to text Brooke, and after that they would text me because I was the one responding and kind of dealing with things. And I kept thinking, Brooke, what's like, you need to like talk to people. You need, like, they're here to support. And looking back, I felt like because I was dealing it with that way, it doesn't necessarily mean that Brooke was supposed to, or that she had to deal with it that way. And that has since flipped, where I feel like I'm not talking to people about it, and Brooke is super open and wants the support and wants people talking with her. And so it just was very interesting. In that time, I had opened up and she had closed, and now, like, I feel like I'm more closed and she's opened up. So that's definitely kind of goes with our personality, and it kind of makes sense when, like, both of us. There was something else that I wanted to note on that. We have a neighbor who has experienced loss, and her and her husband, they came over and visited, and I felt like it was a nice gesture, but I didn't really understand the benefit of really having support or conversations with other people that have experienced loss. But they have become really good friends of our family, and they gave me probably the biggest piece of advice. I remember them saying, don't expect the other person to grieve how you grieve. And you have to realize that. And I feel like that takeaway has helped Brooke and I more times than I can count over this last year, where she's experiencing something, and in my mind I'm thinking she's grieving in a different way than I'm grieving, and I have no right to tell her that she should grieve or do something else, because it's her way of grieving and dealing with it. And on the opposite side, I know she realizes that I grieve differently. And so for her to like not criticize, but her to think, why aren't you sad? Or why are you sad? Or, like think, why are you grieving differently? It just makes more sense when you know that people grieve completely different. That's the birth story, at least. I mean,
Would you like to go into the funeral, or you don't have to if you don't want to?
Yeah, I would say a few points that, from my perspective, I remember us picking out the plot for Tommy. We had a choice between Babyland or picking a plot, and I was either or. I could have chosen one in the Babyland, or if we wanted to get a separate plot. But for Brooke, I felt like she really wanted to be buried with Tommy and have him close to her. And it was only more confirmed when we were driving with the person from the mortuary or from the cemetery, the representative. We rounded this corner and it sits up on this like field at the base of a mountain, and just looking at Brooke's face when we rounded that corner and she said, "This is where I want him buried." It was just that confirmation that you want to hear, because you spend a lot more time than you ever imagine at cemeteries. We were never cemetery people, I guess. We never went and saw a lot of people, once in a while, I guess, on Memorial Day, or if your parents want to go see somebody, you'd go and see a grave. But like, we're regulars there, and to have it be the spot that makes her 100% happy and confirm that's where she wanted, it makes all the difference. A little bit on the funeral, I remember thinking all the funerals in the past, well, not all of them, most of them have been older individuals that have lived out their lives, and you're going to kind of celebrate. Like, I remember there's always like side groups that are kind of like laughing and telling funny stories of the person throughout their lives, and I just feel like that's like the only experience I've had with funerals as an adult. And so for me to go in and just not have fun stories and not a way to celebrate life, it just devastated me. And Brooke and I both chose to speak, which, looking back, like, I don't know why, because I could barely get a sentence out without crying. And I thought, what am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to do? And so I decided to write a note to Tommy from his father, and just talking to him as if he was there. Because in that mode, the words came so easily, because there were so many things I wanted to say to him. There were so many things that I wish I could have said, and so many things that I hope he understands. And I'm not a person of words, but I just hope that he was there listening, and that was the best way I felt like I could convey what I was feeling. And I just remember going to the gravesite, and that, for the most part, is kind of a blur, just because you're going, and instead of you being a supporter or just kind of somebody on the outside during a lot of these funerals, like, you're kind of on the main stage, and you're thinking, like, really? Like, look at this little casket. Like, this should not be happening. It's a 2-foot casket. Like, how is this happening to us? And it's kind of after that, like, I feel like it just blurs. Like, I felt like I was in the moment and feeling like I'm trying to feel him close, and then for like weeks after, I have no idea what what even went. Like, I guess I could probably go through like a camera roll or like something, but I feel like it was there that I felt like we had laid him to rest, and like the realities of like what was going to happen in the future just like compounding, and we were trying to figure it out. But up until that point, like we always had something, it was like, okay, like we have the funeral, like all this stuff has happened, we have the funeral, and we were thinking through it, and then after that, like it just, I don't remember. Yeah, and then this last year has been kind of a whirlwind. There are highs and lows, just like any other year. I would say, definitely more lows than normal, just based on the realities and triggers that come along. And every milestone that passes, you always are thinking, well, he should be walking by now, or he should be crawling, or, you know, you start seeing other kids that would be his same age, and you think, oh, I wonder what his hair would look like right now, or, yeah, it's just those little moments that come along that make you still wonder, like, why Tommy? Like, the only thing that is like, I just feel like a need for distraction. Like, I feel like that's the best way that I try to deal with things is distraction. Like, I feel like I deal with things internally, but outwardly, like a lot of it just comes across as like I need a distraction. Like, I feel like time has been good to heal and help me, but it's good to have distractions and children that just keep things going. Like, I felt like we couldn't get our kids back soon enough because like they need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to do things, and it drove us forward. It like helped us keep going.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for opening up and sharing your personal story with us. I'd like to say thanks to Ben for coming on the podcast and showing a vulnerable side of his life and sharing the story of his son Tommy with us. Head over to our website, stillapartofus.com. There you can find the show notes, including a full transcript of this interview and any resources that were mentioned. You can sign up for a short and helpful email newsletter. There you can learn how you can become a patron and support the work it takes to produce this show for just a few dollars a month. And lastly, you can find out how to get in touch with us if you want to share your child's story on the show. This show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song, She Dreams in Blue. You could find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend who might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they are still a part of us. The only time to eat diet food is when you're waiting for the steak to cook. Julia Child.